Welcome to The Thread. The Thread is a space for fresh perspectives on Christian leadership, global culture, and evangelism in our fast-changing world. Hosted by me, Stephen Foster, and brought to you by Alpha. And it's a real privilege to have as a guest today, Keithen Schwahn. And Keithen is the student and youth pastor at Church of the City, New York. Welcome, Keithen.
Hey, it's so good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Great to have you with us. And tell us, Keithen, so where did you grow up?
So I grew up in the most rural part of the States. So it's a state called Wyoming.
Okay.
It's near Yellowstone National Park.
Oh, beautiful.
So think like the Rocky Mountains and like all of that. So grew up really small town. And about 18 years old, I moved to the West Coast and was in Portland, Oregon for 10 years. And then for the past 3 years, I've been in New York City. And my wife and I and our son, Powell, we live in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. So kind of been in all these different pockets of the States. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Amazing. And tell us a little bit about your experience of kind of that period of like moving to Portland, you know, as a student and how you found that.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I didn't grow up in a context where it was even financially reasonable to be thinking about like going to school, like really far away from home. Grew up in a relatively like low income family. And so it really was like a miracle of God that opened a door through a scholarship for me to be in Portland. And so I look at all of the different doors that have opened in my life, and I just feel like I'm just walking through open doors that the Lord has made happen that I couldn't have made happen on my own. And even just if you were to trace it back to like, how did this scholarship open? How did that opportunity open? How did you even hear about this church in Portland to go be a part of? It just doesn't make a lot of logical sense. So I receive my life as like a huge gift from God rather than something that I like white knuckled and like made happen on my own, you know? Yeah.
And you've got such a passion for the emerging generation, leaders in the emerging generation. That's what you're kind of pouring.
And that actually came from part of my story. So when I was 12 years old, I have two siblings that are really close in age to me. But when I was 12, my parents sat us down and said that we were going to have another son.
Okay.
And so I have my youngest brother who's 12 years younger than me. And so he's a freshman at university right now.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, you know, when I started into youth ministry, my youngest brother was just hitting grade 6. Okay. And so he was just beginning like the student ministry moment. And so for me, you know, a driving question of my life is like, what will the state of the church be that I hand off to my youngest brother? Oh. And, you know, the gift of being a student pastor, but also an older brother is that I feel like I just have a genuine like love and care for him, more so than this is like a career or something that I'm like super like passionate about climbing ranks or doing ministry stuff. I think that the Lord early on just gave me a love for my brother and like a deep skin in the game investment in the future of the church from like a really young age, you know? So this feels like a natural like overflow of that. You know, rather than like waking up one day and being like, I want to be a pastor, I want to be like a Bible teacher, like all this stuff. I think the Lord has taken my love for my brother and then opened a door to lead the future of the church, like through that, if that makes sense.
That's amazing.
So,
that's amazing. So that's almost where the passion came from.
Yeah, totally.
Wow. Yeah. And so you moved to Portland, and Portland, like lots of places in the US and in the UK and other places in the West, was at that stage going through quite a lot of deconstruction.
Yes.
And there was kind of almost like a wave of deconstruction, I know, particularly on, you know, the West coastal cities, the eastern coastal cities in the US.
Totally. Yeah.
And what was it like for you as a kind of a student? You know, you got your faith, but you're also experiencing all these cultural tides, and probably people around you are wrestling with their faith. How did you find that?
Yeah. Well, you know, I find that there are these pockets of the States that we call post-Christian, you know, but really, I mean, UK, Canada, different parts of Australia is just like, that's just culture. Yeah. Like that's just life, you know? But we have this unique kind of Christian culture that can exist in certain pockets of the States. And so I grew up in, a more like rural conservative, went to like a Baptist kind of like Bible church. And for me, always had this like my faith was strong and vibrant due to like the way that my parents invested like in me. So my dad was a brand new follower of Jesus when like we were born, and he came to faith through relationship with my mom and her family. He is indigenous, so he grew up on a Sioux reservation in central South Dakota. And for him, just the life and relationship with God was just like not really present. And so meets my mom. My mom actually is a crazy story. She's engaged to another person.
Yep.
And is at the library at university. And my dad walks by, and my mom feels this word from the Holy Spirit. You're actually not meant to marry the man that you're engaged to, but you're actually meant to like go and like get to know this man. And she was like, that is just a ridiculous like thing to think. And is that just me or whatever? Yeah. And then, you know, she breaks off the engagement and just starts to like pursue this relationship with my dad. So I feel like even that feels like just such like a miracle, you know? Yeah. So my dad is a brand new believer kind of through getting to know my mom and her family, investing in him. And so then we come into the picture like really early in my dad's faith journey, but my mom just is like a prophet. Like she just walks in the power of the Spirit and just a deep well. Yeah. And so, anyway, so I grew up in a really interesting environment where I definitely knew that like God is real, that the scriptures are trustworthy. So I kind of had this like sacred like pocket, you know, but then moving to Portland felt like getting right into like the middle of spiritual war. Yeah. And it's interesting. John Tyson, who's our lead pastor at our church, he says whenever he flies into Portland, he just feels like a spiritual darkness. Okay. And almost like to the point where he says like coming back to New York, he's like, it's nice to leave like some of the darkness and the demonic activity like in Portland, you know? But that for me is like, I think it's a very real like battleground. And I think in the States particularly, it really has become like the epicenter of like progressivism, of like liberal thought. And so whenever there's something significant in the culture, so if like a few years ago, it was the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all of that, is like the whole world looks at how is Portland going to react to this, almost like a battleground of progressive ideology, you know? So I moved to Portland though, not necessarily because of all of that, but because I heard of this move of God happening in a university ministry in the west part of the city. And I think for me, you know, growing up in a rural conservative environment, I was like, why in Portland is this thriving move of God like happening? Yeah. Because it didn't compute that like Portland and a move of God were like synonymous, you know? And so for me to move there and to see it, I think that what God started to do in that season of my life was give me vision for seeing God do things in places that the rest of the country or the rest of the world have said it's kind of impossible to see God move there. For sure. So that was like the journey of like walking into friends deconstructing, the battleground of progressive ideology. That was the season in Portland for me, but I felt like God had called me there for that reason, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So tell me this, if people listening who might have emerging leaders or young adults in their congregation or students or themselves are young adults or students and actually maybe people around them are losing their faith or deconstructing, what things did you learn from walking alongside your friends who are having a difficult time or from yourself that might be useful for people to kind of take on board about how you like walk alongside someone who's deconstructing or walk alongside someone who's really questioning the fundamentals of their faith? Yeah. What would you say?
Yeah. I mean, as I think back on that time in my life, I went through so many things that are maybe traditional off-roads into deconstruction and like leaving faith. And so I'm a young person who had just like moved from the center of the country to like the progressive coast. So there's like that dynamic of like leaving your family, all of that. Another thing is I went to a university and studied the Bible, but the whole program was definitely like standing in authority over the Bible rather than like learning from it and like growing under its authority. It was definitely like Deconstruct the Bible was kind of the Bible program that I was even a part
of. They probably didn't have that as a title.
No, no, I don't think so. It's, I started in a cohort of like 20 young people that were studying to become like pastors and be in ministry. And out of that cohort of 20, there are 2 of us that have held on to our faith and are like leading in the church like right now, And it was just like, it was an intense moment. Something else, like we had like a death of a family member. So confronting like suffering and pain and the problem of human suffering and the like the feeling of injustice toward God in that way was significant. When I was an intern at a youth ministry, had one of our senior leaders had this like really significant moral failure. And I think that young people, I mean, you probably experience this too, are so skeptical of church leadership and like any claims of spiritual authority are just so like under attack. So having like one of the most significant spiritual voices in my life, have a massive moral failure and like I don't even know like where he is in faith now. That's often a huge like off-road for people.
So what made the difference, Keithen? So if that's, you had all those ingredients of, this is the time to walk away and off ramp. What do you feel made the difference for you?
Yeah. Well, I feel like community was a huge part of it for me. And being a part of that church that just continued to like teach the Bible, pray in the Holy Spirit, welcome in the presence of God. Like the things that we often think are like subdivided but having like a word and a spirit culture to participate in, to feel like fueled by. I feel like the first thing to go when people are in the path of deconstruction is they're like, well, I just need to take a step out from church. I need to be away from this. It's too much. I'm struggling with this. Where honestly, some of the best things to do are actually to press into community, not to run away or hide, but to actually press in. And something that I find really helpful in the scriptures in that is the book of Job. So, Job goes through immense suffering, pain that we can't hardly imagine. And his friends come around him and start just like talking about concepts and philosophies and like, oh, well, this is probably the reason. And if you could just get your act together here. But the end of the book, you see that Job, the whole time, he doesn't engage in the like petty banter, but he takes his suffering like to God directly. And he says, I need an audience with the Lord. I want to take all of this into the presence of God. And in that, he gets the response. So Job's friends talk about God. Job talks to God.
I see.
And I find that like a lot of people, when they're in this moment of doubt or pain or suffering or whatever, they remove themselves from church rather than saying, I need to get into the presence to bring the suffering to him. And that's where the most significant breakthrough comes in the book of Job. And so I found that really true in my experience in Portland.
So interesting. So resisting the temptation just to
isolate
and pushing into community, pushing into church.
And I feel like also the pressure to have to have it all together. People think that like faith in God is this like perfectly clean and packaged thing. That like if I don't have it all dialed, I must not belong here. Or be welcome to be in this space. And I think that that's such a fragile perspective of faith. That like if God needs you to have everything of your heart and mind dialed into perfect theology to be a part of it, or to never go through pain and suffering or doubt, then I mean, there's a very small group of people that would be a part of the church, right? And that's like the lie is that you have to have everything perfect. And the Lord just wants to, I think, bring people in to say, come as you are. Like God's not fragile. And I think that a lot of young people need to realize like bringing who you fully are into the space is one of the most powerful things that you can do. Like don't come in with the mask. Don't come in with the pretending. Don't come in with the Instagram filter. Don't come in with the perfect storyline. Like you can actually come in as you. Because if you teach that God is actually resilient and strong enough for you to bring your honest self, not the manicured fake self, like that's where God can do like the best work in people,
It's really exciting. I love that. And one of the things you've done, you've experienced yourself and you've done a lot of is raising up young leaders. So presumably in Portland, you're being raised up as a student leader and then as a young adult leader. And then since then, you've, I know, poured out a lot of your life in kind of identifying, raising up and investing in young leaders. What are the things you've learned about how to do that well and how to be raised up well? Because it's kind of a two, on the one hand, it's the leader raising up. On the other hand, it's the young leader who's being raised up. And what have you learned about both sides of that?
Well, I feel like I had this really cool environment. So in Portland, I felt like there was a huge focus on spiritual formation. So actually taking on the life and the rhythms of Jesus and not having Christianity be like a theory that you ascribe to, but no lived experience. I feel like the era in Portland, particularly with people that are very skeptical of faith and doubtful of, I mean, is Jesus even good for the world? You know, like a lot of the previous generation was asking the question, like, you know, is Jesus true? And I feel like a lot of Gen Z is asking the question, like, is Jesus good? Like, is Christianity even like inherently good for the world, or is this like toxic and oppressive? And, you know, so I feel like that was a huge thing in Portland, is just like, this actually leads to your flourishing. To take on the life and the rhythms of Jesus. It's a light yoke. It's an easy burden. It's the way that you were designed to live. Right. So to live in tune with him is your flourishing and freedom. Right. So like, that's a huge part of it. So I would say to young leaders, like, don't settle for just theory, like get this lived into your life. And I think that part of it is you can't take people where you haven't been. You can't bring people on a journey that you're not currently living. And I think sometimes there's so much pressure in leadership that you have to be all of these incredible, almost like impossible standard list of things, but that the spiritual life of a young leader can often like wither on the vine, you know? And so I think you have to embody what you're wanting to invite people into. So Portland was huge on that. But then I would say that New York and the past 3 years of my life have been this baptism into expectance for God to move and for God to do what only he can do. Right. So there are certain things that we are contending for right now that with our best strategy, with our best ingenuity and what we can pull together, marketing campaigns and podcasts and whatever, like we're facing a level of like decline and a level of crisis within the Western church that demands something larger. And I think the move to New York and being around the crew that I've been in is like, we need to teach like a contending heart of prayer. So I love to bring leaders all the way to the limit of what's possible for their life. And to face it, you know, like we need to face the fact that we can't bring about a move of God. Like we can't save the Western church. Like we've got no shot. And when you feel small in regard to the moment of decline, you get really desperate for God to move. And so that's the thing for me, getting desperate in prayer and becoming a person of intercession rather than just a person of strategy or, you know, and for me being a student pastor, like the numbers of young people walking away from Jesus in the States are just like shocking and intense. And we're seeing like moments of hope and spot fires of things happening. But to see a national move of God would take the hand of God. And so that for me, I think if I could say to a young leader, if you could really ask God for a burden for your environment and find, like, push yourself to the point of seeing the full pain. I mean, this is the gospel, right? Like Jesus doesn't just come and whitewash the whole thing. He comes and enters in to the pain and the brokenness of the world in order to bring it about its freedom and redemption. I feel like a young leader to get good with weeping over your city, weeping over decline, weeping over the young people in your life that you know are walking away from faith in God, and then asking for God to do what only he can do.
So interesting, Keithen, because I think someone once said to me, if you've just got spiritual practices and there's no spark of the spirit, then you've got like the grate in a fireplace. And if you've just got the spark of the spirit and no spiritual practices, then eventually the fire will go down because of the lack of oxygen.
That's such a good metaphor.
So if you can combine the kind of spiritual practices, almost like the grate in a fire, which allows oxygen to come in and fuel, with the coals and the kind of fire and everything, then actually that fire can burn for a really long time. And so I sometimes think that actually what we need to embed in the rising generation and in ourselves, in our own hearts, is I'm going to be absolutely committed to these spiritual practices, and I want to grow in discipleship, following Jesus. And at the same time, we're desperate for the Holy Spirit to just set us ablaze.
But what a perfect environment. Right? And for the need of the moment. And I feel like that the two words that we've been using with our young people are zeal and faithfulness. And I feel like environments can kind of lean on one of those or the other. It's like, oh, it's all about faithfulness. It's all about just resilience and like seeking God in the secret and the quiet place and all of this. But then those environments can often be lacking the like passion and zeal and welcoming in God and getting desperate for him. But when you have zeal and faithfulness connected together, I mean, you're talking about the kind of potency that is the life of Jesus, the kind of potency that is the early church, right? Yeah. I mean, because you have the Holy Spirit comes in the book of Acts, and then the next chapters are like they're trying to like manage like food distribution. Yeah. They're trying to like be kind to everybody. They're trying to like send out the right people and discern who that is, right? So it's like the faithfulness on the ground. And like, come Holy Spirit, I want more of you, you know? And I love those don't have to be in conflict.
I love that, like zeal and faithfulness. It's like a simultaneous combination that would spark a spontaneous combustion.
Yes.
That would set that generation on, the generations on fire.
Yes.
I love that. And say what you see, because you're alongside lots of young leaders, lots of people who are teens and at college. And what is it you see in that the rising generation that gives you hope and excitement?
Yeah. So something that I've been thinking about a ton is like what produces the kind of disciples of Acts chapter 4. They're like the first time that they experience persecution and beating, it says that they leave that beating rejoicing that they had been counted worthy to suffer for the name.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just think like, what we often bring young people into faith with is what we have to keep them with.
Yeah.
And I think if we've felt this pressure of like, oh, well, Jesus in the gospel is like, it's really tough and they're growing up in post-Christian environments. So what we need to do is actually make this Christian thing feel like the world.
Yeah.
And
or
if
dilute
it's
it in some way.
if it's diluted, if it's nice, if it's easy, if it's packaged, if it's
low ask,
totally,
low bar.
And I think what that's done is that we then are on a hamster wheel of trying to keep people with a low ask. By just putting in more attractional things and consumerist, individualist things. And I just find that Jesus has this like incredibly high call of discipleship where, you know, he says, anyone that wants to follow me can come and be my disciple by taking up their cross daily and following me. You know, for the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And I've just found that like, the more that I call young people into sacrifice, into the worthiness of suffering for the name, that's where the potency of the gospel's gone forward, more so than like, how do I manipulate and structure this to feel as easy as possible? Because here's the thing, I feel like with, you know, the algorithms in TikTok, with the culture that people are in, everyone is trying to give you a way to make your life better. Here's how to make your life better. Here's a life hack. Here's a 5-minute video. Here's how you can improve your life.
Optimize.
Yes. And you know, we did a talk on suffering, and that Jesus is worthy of suffering for in society and in culture. And I had this kid named Justin walk up to the front of the altar. This was like 4 weeks ago. And he falls on his face, and we enter into this prayer moment where he says, I don't believe in Jesus, never been to church. And everyone has told me like, this is what you can live for. And I've never heard a vision of something worth dying for.
So good.
And he surrenders his life to Jesus at that altar and is now like being raised up as like a young leader in our church. But that's the thing of like, I think we think, okay, you know, this podcast is about like evangelism of the future. We think that it has to be like low bar to welcome. And I honestly feel like the more and more that we're in a life hack TikTok culture, to have something actually deep and rich and meaningful that's calling people to come and die will be like the counter narrative that draws young people in.
It's so interesting because I think it reminds me of how in years gone by, we would almost be embarrassed about asking people to invite their friends to church because it's too costly, you know, to go into a secular school and say, would you like to come to this Christian event, or would you like to come to youth or church with me? But the rising generation are so bold.
I think and so.
So
that's a shift.
We're just finishing off Youth Alpha here, and the kind of students and younger youth, they've been not only running it, but leading the groups themselves.
Wow.
So some of them who have come to faith in the last year are now like, oh, we're running Youth Alpha.
So
like,
good.
They've
Yes,
only come to
that's
faith
it.
last year. But then they're inviting, like someone told me like half the class came
Wow.
from some of these guys, like 11 from 1 year group, you know,
Wow.
in a completely secular school, all been invited and they're all turning up. And I find that so fascinating. It's so bold.
Yes.
But it's like high ask. It's like,
Yes.
yeah, I don't just want to come to
Yes.
faith myself.
Yes.
I want to share it with other people.
I think something that we're experiencing right now is a shift from, I think that millennials and Gen X were a far greater move into secularism.
Yeah.
And I've actually found that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are far more spiritually curious and open than like purely hard, you know, secular humanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's this beautiful like crack. Like, you know, I was on the subway a few days ago and I saw this Subway advert for, it was like a budgeting app, like a millennial budgeting app or whatever. And one of the thing is like, oh, you can maximize your budget by downloading this app. And as an example, on the line items of this like fake phone and this advert, it said crystals.
Yeah.
It was like the number one like line item in a budget.
Yes.
And I'm like, why would an advert put like something overtly spiritual as like, oh, this is an example of what like a Gen Z person could be buying on their phone? It's because they know that like the narratives of a progressive secular world are failing Gen Z. Yeah. All over the place. And I think that's what you asked, what gives me hope. Yeah. That gives me a ton of hope is that like all this secular project is losing steam. Yeah. And it's creating this curiosity within young people that are open to so much more. And so sure, they're open to a lot of dark stuff, but I find at the same time, they're open to anything that actually has power behind it. Yeah. And so introducing them to the ultimate power that is the Spirit. Yeah.
I love, Mark Sayers has this saying, secularism is undergoing a faith crisis. I think it's so interesting.
I think it's true. Yeah. And on the ground, I'm experiencing that.
Yeah. And we're seeing that with students and young adults. There's just this extraordinary openness that I've never seen before. And it often without any prior understanding of the Christian story. Right. Very open and just, you know, responding to invitations to come to church. Sometimes the Holy Spirit nudging people into church, you don't even know quite why they're there.
It's so good.
And so I do think it's a really exciting. So say a little bit about what you think are some of the challenges, Keithen, that the rising generation is facing and how we as a church can come alongside them.
Yeah. Well, I think that as culture continues to move further and further away from life and faith in Jesus, I think that the impulse to worship is still like deep in there. And I think that what I've seen in my time is like people will often channel religious faith into like politics or into causes or into, you know, how I identify as this now. Yeah. So they're putting their like worship into like their own self-identity or causes that give them like meaning and like all of that. So I would say that like the confusing nature of all of the competing narratives is like one of the most confusing things that young people are walking through. Yeah. But the thing that I love is like, I actually think that young people are longing for like, what is truth? Like, is there something behind this or not? And I'm finding like that, you know, when Jesus in the book of Revelation, speaking to the church in Laodicea, is saying that like, you know, I would rather you be hot or cold, but since you're lukewarm, like get out of here. Yeah. And I feel like I find that within like a lot of young people is they're like, either this is true and everything and worthy of my life, or this is like nothingness and I'm out. But I kind of like that moment, but realizing that like a lot of young people within the next few years are coming to these confrontational moments with like, is this real or is this not?
It's so interesting, Keithen, because pre-pandemic, McKinsey, management consultants globally, they did a study and they were trying to define the rising generation, Gen Z. And and what they said, we think that what will mark this generation more than anything else is its desire for truth. Wow. And they even went so far as to say, we'll call it true gen or generation truth. Wow. Which at the time, everyone was thinking, oh, no, it's subjective,
right.
relativism.
Relativism.
But actually, no, there's this real hunger for truth. And why do you mind me asking, because one of the challenges of the rising generation is like the access to anything online. Yeah. And I know you've said before that part of your story is like, you know, being exposed to pornography at a young age, the impact that had on you. And what are the things you've learned personally and how might that help us support, you know, kind of encourage, you know, and help those who are facing either addiction or just the confusion of all that stuff being available online?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of like the most central parts of my story is like, growing up and having parents that really just didn't have a framework for like the accessibility of like online pornography. And so that was like the battlefield of my life, and feeling really just wounded by like the lack of care or protection that I felt like my dad particularly like gave me or didn't give me. And so I would just say that like the awareness of all of this is like an incredible invitation for us. And I think that what we can do as, millennials or older people is we could say like, hey, well, we were just screwed up and we had to navigate it alone. So, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think functionally cursing generations by our passivity and apathy and our own pain and woundedness. And so I would just say, like, first, it's got to come with this framework of like, there is a different way possible. Like, do we actually think, like, Stephen Foster, like, do you actually think that it's possible for a young person to walk through life in faith in Jesus and stay pure with their sexuality with an iPhone? Right? But we need to confront that question, because if we as leaders think, oh, well, this is just like a part of life, people get addicted to this and then they'll have to get off later, and this is just going to like ruin a generation's mind, and and all the studies of like how detrimental pornography is to a young mind, and they'll just swim their way through it and whatever, and I don't need to really like care. It's like that, in a sense, is the apathy that I'm trying to fight against, and that I want to fight against. But it's interesting because a lot of us are doing this without having a framework of it being done well in generations before us.
For sure.
And I mean,
for sure,
the generations before confronted the onslaught of the internet. In a way that, like, I mean, my folks were figuring out what online content even was, and like,
what
how,
is the web?
Totally. So there's a level of grace there. But for us being the like guinea pig generation of like, hey, just do anything on the internet that you want, finding incredible sin and brokenness, we have an opportunity now to like be a part of like the healing of that, And so with my younger brother Jet, and with, I just had a son 15 months ago. And so I'm just constantly, praying for them, praying a different story, combating the apathy in my own heart, saying that, oh, well, porn or bad internet content will just always be a part of it.
That's just kind of baked in.
I gotta fight that that's okay and that's normal. But then I would say last is like just listening. Like, man, what would have happened if my dad would have sat down with me and just been like, hey, what are you coming across online? Is there anything you feel like you're hiding that is hurting the relationship between us and the relationship between you and God? Is there anything that you feel scared to bring to me? Right? Like, I mean, and that conversation could have taken 15 minutes that, would have completely transformed my entire time as a young person. You know what I mean?
But you're a great example of that, Keithen, because you've made the decision to speak openly and be vulnerable about your own experience. And presumably that brings a measure of freedom to the youth you're leading, and it kind of takes stuff out of the darkness into the light. Blows away some of the shame, and then there's an opportunity for people to actually have an honest conversation about what's going on. And then they can bring stuff to you. And how can we kind of create a culture where you can actually constructively bring a freedom and a light?
Well, I think certain methods of church in the past have been so about like a performance and like a veneer of perfection. And so I think when you as the leader are willing to like lead with your weakness and lead with your sin and lead with like where you're currently like moving forward in your life in God, it just invites in a whole different dynamic to the room. Like, I don't want people to finish the time under my leadership and say, Keithen's really awesome. I want them to finish the time not in an admiration of me, but in an admiration of Jesus. And I think if we only make ourselves like the spiritual heroes of the things that we're leading, or we're only the exemplar of virtue or whatever, it creates barriers. And I think that, because of the way that algorithms work, I mean, young people are being pitched content all the time that they're in their mind having to say, is this real? Is this not real? Is this true? Is this not true? Is this authentic or is this AI? You know, and they're constantly dividing information like that. And so us as spiritual leaders, if they get a whiff of us hiding, covering, saying something, but behind the scenes is not true. I found this they have an incredible filter for authenticity.
Yes.
And it actually matters. And so, and then in the wake of a lot of different crises of moral leadership in the past, and particularly in the Western church, it creates this like awareness that I think for a leader to actually be about it, to model vulnerability, authenticity is the way to buy capital with young people. Rather than like, oh, they need you to be a certain level of perfect before they'll trust you. It's actually like reverse.
So it's not so much about being impressive. It's more about, are you real? Are you authentic? Can I trust you? And then that provides a space for a relationship and to grow.
Yes, exactly. You know, John the Baptist baptized in water, but then he says, there's one coming after me that will baptize in the Holy Spirit and fire. And I think that that's what Jesus longs to do, is to actually like burn away anything that's not of him. And then Paul in 1 Corinthians picks up this metaphor and he says, at the judgment day, like things will be shown for what they are. Either you built with wood or hay or straw, or you built with costly materials, gold and silver and jewels. And when the fire of God comes close, like it will be revealed what was underneath the whole time. And I just think that like for me as a young leader, and you know, before I have the full weight of leading an entire church on me, or spiritual leadership in all these ways, is like, am what I'm investing in right now, am I building with hay and straw and stubble, which is like things to look impressive, but under the surface is not like deep? Or am I building in gold, silver, costly stones that actually take my level of humility? It's going to be harder work, slower work, but saying that like, I would rather build with what's real than just what looks good on the outside. That's a choice.
Keithen, I love this conversation. Picture a 25-year-old emerging leader who's listening to this. What encouragement would you bring them?
Protect the hope in your spirit. Don't allow the world to beat you into pessimism, skepticism, apathy, hopelessness. I mean, I think that it's so important to guard your joy, to guard your hope. I mean, and if Revelation 21 and 22 are not just a distant pipe dream that may or may not come about, but if Revelation 21 and 22 are the coming imminent reality of the universe, then we need to bathe ourselves like in this posture of like, God is coming. Jesus will, he says, behold, I am making all things new. That he will wipe every tear from every eye. There will be no longer sorrow, mourning, death, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Behold, I'm making all things new. Like if this is true, if the gospel is true, if God is moving his purposes forward on the earth, then like we need to protect our joy. We need to protect our hope. And I find far too many leaders have allowed the zeal of their 20s and 30s to be washed out just by the weight and the burden of life and the pain and disappointment and all of this stuff, which is very real. But I think something that the Lord is trying to impress on me is similar to like Caleb in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua, where it says, you know, when he was 40 years old, he went into the land and he saw it. And he was one of two people that came back and said, this is a good land. God is with us. We can take it. He's only one of two people that said that. And then in the book of Joshua, God allows Caleb to go into the land. It says that he's 80 years old. And that he said, give me the hill country, which is like the hardest to capture. He says, give me the hill country, for I'm stronger today than I was when I first saw the land at 40. This is an 80-year-old guy. And so I think for me, I want to give every young leader the vision that like by the time you're in your 80s and 90s, you should actually have more zeal, more passion, more hunger for God to move than less. I think our culture says, oh, as you get older and more mature, you'll just naturally like have like less of that. And I think it's Rolheiser's book, Sacred favorite fire is like, don't allow the fire in your eyes to go out, and do whatever it takes to protect that level of expectation and joy.
Keithen, there's so much gold there. I love it. I love the idea of zeal and faithfulness. I love the idea of protect the hope in your heart, protect the joy in your heart. And I love that image of Caleb. I think Caleb's one of the few people who's praised by the mouth of the living God.
Yeah.
And it said, "Here is my servant Caleb, who follows me wholeheartedly."
Yeah.
And I think you're giving us a vision for what it means to follow the Lord wholeheartedly. And we're so grateful for everything you've shared.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a joy to be here. Thank you for all that you do.
Thanks so much for joining us on The Thread. It's been great to have you with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. The Thread podcast is brought to you by Alpha, the home of curiosity, conversations, and exploring the Christian faith together. If you know someone who's curious about faith, Alpha might just be the space for them. Why not visit alpha.org or follow us on Instagram and share an invite to a course near you.